Welcome to the Affirming Village podcast, where we center neurodivergent voices, affirm diverse ways of being, and empower families, educators, and advocates with knowledge that truly honors the whole learner. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff, a late diagnosed autistic ADHD mental health therapist and non-attorney special education advocate, and Lisa Baskin-Wright, an ADHD and dyslexic educator and IEP coach. Together, we dig into conversations about neuroaffirming practices, special education, and disability rights. Please remember, nothing shared on this podcast is medical or legal advice, and the views shared here by the host and the guest are their personal opinions. This space is for educational purposes only, to help you feel informed, empowered, and never alone in the village.
Welcome back to the Affirming Village podcast, where we have honest conversations about special education, advocacy, and what it really means to build neuro-affirming communities.
And today we're talking about something that doesn't get named enough.
When ego shows up at the IEP table, which, as a quick side note, I have threatened to write a song called When Ego Shows Up at the IEP Table.
Because sometimes what blocks collaboration isn't policy, it isn't funding, it isn't even lack of knowledge or practice.
It's pride. It's defensiveness. It's the need to be right instead of the willingness to be reflective.
It's centering credentials over curiosity.
It's protecting professional identity instead of protecting the learner.
And when adults prioritize their reputation, authority, or comfort over accountability,
the child loses.
So in this episode, we're unpacking what ego actually looks like in IEP meetings, both subtle and obvious, and how it disrupts trust, communication, and meaningful collaboration.
We're also talking about the difference between confidence and control.
Between expertise and humility.
Because being knowledgeable doesn't exempt anyone from being reflective in their practice.
If you've ever walked out of a meeting feeling dismissed, talked over, or like the conversation shifted from supporting a learner to defending adult decisions,
then this conversation is for you.
Let's get into it. So, yeah, this came from, I think, kind of a series over this school year, definitely in the past few years. But as Lisa and I have talked about, and any advocate you talk to will tell you, and any educator and any parent for that matter, this school year under this current administration is just different. And ego has come shining to the forefront, almost like just a lack of even attempting to hide it anymore, I think is really where that's come from. And so Lisa and I were just talking about how we definitely need to do an episode on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And a while ago, it's like just triggered my memory as we've been thinking about this episode. A while ago, I did a post on Instagram that it was like, what can ego look like and what can ego sound like? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes the way ego shows up is really kind of in your face.
Mm-hmm.
And it's through like action and word, or I should say through words that are like really dismissive or whatever, right? But sometimes it's more subtle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually body language, right? Like it's, and so it's like you walk out of the meeting with this real ick feeling, but you can't necessarily pinpoint because something like super egregious wasn't necessarily said, but it's like this sort of centering of the adult and like, I'm the expert and I don't have to take your perspective into consideration.
Right.
Like vibe that really can leave families feeling really just ick when they walk out.
Yeah, no, and I think Lisa and I have a unique perspective too, because I was just thinking about a conversation I had with a parent the other day, because we do the majority of I do all my meetings, and I know Lisa's done the majority of her meetings virtually. And so I have had times where, just because of where, the laptop is set up or the board or whatever, I might be looking at one team member the whole meeting.
Sure.
Or, I had one the other day, which they were it was so accommodating. I, got to give them kudos because every time that the team member was talking, the assistant principal was like, turn it to them so she could see who's talking. So I really
Oh,
appreciated that.
appreciate
I love that because then I wasn't like guessing or anything like that. But a lot of times because of that, we don't see a lot of the nonverbals and a lot of the body language. And so I've had parents tell me, like, oh my gosh, they were not pleased when, and it wasn't even just like when I was saying something, it could be another staff member saying something. But the another person in the room wasn't pleased and they could see their body language because it wasn't in line with what they wanted to be said. And I think sometimes when you're the parent of a neurodivergent or disabled learner, you learn that you have to recognize body cues, you have to recognize nonverbals. And so, because of that, I think we become more attuned to seeing those things. And sometimes that is where that ego can show up, is that somebody's maybe, it's kind of like we talk about like that Freudian slip, right? It's like they're
right.
saying one thing or they're nodding like they agree with what you're saying, but you're seeing their entire body show you something else. And so that's why we talk about like the difference between subtle and obvious, because sometimes it's this nonverbals where it's a sigh or a sound or a look that lets us know, like, oh, okay, or how they're saying it and then their body language. And it's like something's not aligning there. So I think that's being virtual. I found that a lot too, where parents will tell me, hey, like while you were talking, this is how they were being in the room. And I'm like,
Right,
I tried.
right, right. And that's why, yes, similar to you, I do 99.9% of my meetings virtually. I have very small handful of families that I support locally where I go in person. And it is a different feel to like be in the room and
Mhm.
be able to pick up that. But honestly, my favorite dynamic, and it obviously doesn't always happen, is if everyone is virtual. And
Mhm.
so I
Mhm.
can like, it's like,
Same.
what's it, Family Feud? Not Family Feud. What was whatever game show from the
Oh yeah,
80s
I know
where
what you remember where
everybody's
they're
got
all
their
in the
own box.
boxes. Yeah.
Yeah. Brady Bunch, maybe. I don't know where my brain's going. It's old. It's Friday night. Well, it's late Friday afternoon as Destiny and I are recording this. But yeah, where you can like actually see everyone. And
Mhm.
so, sometimes when we think about ego showing up at an IEP table, we really think about sort of that verbal piece, that like,
Mhm.
that I'm right, you're wrong, I don't have to listen to you, right? But another way I think it shows up, I'm thinking of a very specific example in my mind. Um, and I'll keep it to this situation, but I think this happens unfortunately more often than we'd like it to,
Mhm.
which is it's not an uncommon path, and I'm sure it was the path for this administrator, for principals to kind of come up a general education path.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
they don't have that experience as a special educator or a related service provider that was supporting neurodivergent and disabled learners, right? So they don't
Absolutely.
necessarily like fully understand the rules of engagement. Obviously, exceptions to the rule exist, of course. Um, but there can be this mentality that like those are your kids
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
me being here is a total inconvenience.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that is very much so their ego. Like, I'm
Mhm.
busy and you're encroaching on my time. And
Right.
so I'm thinking of this situation, it was just a little bit ago, where I have a learner who is in a segregated classroom, high support needs. Um, the messaging is sort of mixed all across the board, but the like,
Mhm.
I'm telling you this, but I didn't tell you this from the teacher is your learner actually needs two paras with them at all times, like two,
Mhm.
one-to-one aides. So 2-to-1 aid. But some of the folks that have power and all the things are like, what are you talking about? Right. And so um, only those of you on YouTube will be able to see me, but I will describe this to those who are not, is the principal has two screens, right? So she has the meeting that like she should be facing her camera, but her head is completely turned to the side and you can see her typing or eating while she's doing stuff on her other screen. Like the entirety of the meeting. And I have a number of families in this district at this school site. And that is how she always acts because every single one of the learners that I have are in a segregated space. And this person's perspective very much so comes across as, why am I here? This is a waste of my time. And so we were at a meeting recently where we were discussing direct support, para support, one to one. And the team had landed, I shouldn't say the team, the powers that make the decision, the hierarchy, right? The higher level folks had decided, no, 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 your learner does not need this. And the parent understandably became visibly shaken and upset.
Right.
And so, there needed to be some caretaking and further conversation because this was a trash decision and the data was like, they didn't have the data on their side. It was crazy, right? And all of a sudden, like, the principal sort of turns from her her real job, like,
Like,
right?
you wasn't a part of it before. Don't join us now.
Right. And was like, we really care about you and your child. And I just wanted to say, please, right? Your body language in literally every meeting I've ever been in with you is, you're wasting my time and this is beneath me.
Mm-hmm.
But now that we've got a pretty despondent parent, it would be really remiss if you didn't like at least feign some sort of interest. And I just wanted to say, like, did you even pay any attention to the first thing I was? I mean, like, the real snarky teenager in me, like, almost
Right.
came out. But
Right.
like, that to me, I mean, this parent left that meeting just feeling lousy on every home front.
Mm-hmm.
But like, that was a piece of it, that site administrator's ego
Mm-hmm.
is showing up during meetings, but it's showing up in other ways because it's like,
Right.
why should we be investing? Why do we need to listen? Why do I need to listen to my educators who are saying this learner needs more, right? Why do I have to do this? Because, like, it's ridiculous we even have to bother with it, right? Like, it's all of those pieces, and it's ableism at its core, and it's really
Mm-hmm.
gross, but it's a lot of ego, and it's, I wouldn't describe this administrator as subtle, but
I mean, you're looking off to the side, eating, doing everything. You're not subtle, and you
you're not
don't
subtle.
care.
No, you don't care, but it gives off this vibe, not just like you're rude. It
Mm-hmm.
really gives off this, like, I can't believe I have to waste my time and my energy needs to go to the students that matter. And like, then I'll just sort of swoop in and try to like say the thing that sounds right because I'm the principal, except you
Mm-hmm.
haven't shown an ethic of care yet.
Right.
So,
No, I mean,
yeah,
that's absolutely, I mean, that's wow.
it's
Um,
terrible.
that's
Like, what's for lunch this time?
um like, yeah, that's, and I think again, it's talking about that ego showing up at the table. I had a situation where it was, essentially um the assistant, special education director, right? The second in command, quote unquote. And it was, the removal of a learner's one-to-one. And they just, I mean, and when we talk about ego in this situation, the staff comes with the data. There was only one other staff member who was like, oh, they're too dependent on the one-to-one. They don't need the one. And it's one that doesn't, like, they've made comments in the past where the parents, like, I don't even know if they know, like, if they're talking about my child in the way and some of the things they've said. So I don't even think that's accurate. But come to find out that they share an office space with this person, this assistant special education director, too. So that actually made it make more sense. But the way in which the ego showed up in this regard was that we had to do two meetings, and that was only subsequently because they didn't have the data so it actually was three meetings, a meeting before I was brought on, and they didn't have the data to justify a one-to-one or removal or one way or the other. Got the data that justified having it, and you could tell there was that predetermination already of like, they're not going to have it because they're not going to have it. And where the ego showed up in this situation was essentially in the meeting that I was in before meeting number three. This particular individual made it very clear that they were brought in to this position in the district because things had not been done years prior the way they were supposed to be done. And so they are coming in to rectify that. And in that regard, what it was essentially was the questioning of the decisions that were previously made because they didn't quote unquote check certain boxes, regardless of what the learner needed. And that's what this situation was an example of. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to fix that and correct that. So we are in compliance, even though our lack of compliance in that situation, right, theoretically, we don't know, but wasn't done right. So we're going to now correct that and cause harm when if it was done right, based on the history that was shared about this learner, they still would have gotten the one-on-one, right?
Right,
But instead
right.
of acknowledging that, it was just like, no, I've been brought, I mean, and this was literally said in the meeting. I was brought in because decisions and things were done before in an incorrect way, and I've come to correct that. And what was sad about it was that parents were spot on the money. They were like, she's going to take the 1-1. And then we get in the meeting, we look at the data. They have a rating scale in this state for justification. And again, where the ego showed up is that as the case manager and the general education teacher are sitting here saying, there's a need, they put it in the IEP that there was a need. They put that in there themselves.
Sure.
This person completely disregarded that. This person completely questioned their own rating. I even subsequently called out, you're questioning the individuals that interact with this learner every day based on her observation and another individual's observation who only came to do an observation and has never otherwise met the child because you've decided you're in a position of power and this is the decision you've made and this is what's going to happen. And it even was to the point where she said, well, the information in the IEP, I don't know if that's accurate to their own staff. Because I want to be clear, when we're talking about ego showing up at the table, we're just not talking about ego impacting the parent and the learner. It can impact the staff that's working with that learner every single day.
100%.
And because that was said, when the general education teacher proceeded to go over the present levels for what she had provided, she said, and the information provided in the IEP is accurate and up to date and reflective. And I was like, shout out to her because you just questioned her as a professional because you already have predetermined what's going to happen. And so, another way in which ego shows up, I think, is under the guise of policies and procedures. And we have this determined checklist and we have this and that. And it discounts those that are actually on the ground doing the work with that learner every day. And you could just see the deflation in the parents, in the staff, that this individual that just comes in, and we even said that and had that documented in the notes, like you did an observation and one other person and the other person that did the observations in the office with you and agrees with you because they don't know anything about one-to-ones. And after I called them out because they were a mental health professional, they stopped talking because I'm a mental health professional. And I basically was saying, you're trash. Like I was, but that's another way in which that ego, like you mentioned, you have this professional that's in the building that is clearly showing with their body language, their lack of interest, their lack of engagement during the meeting, only chiming in when they think, oh, it's my turn to say something. And then you have this individual that comes from outside the building and their words automatically let you know that they're coming in as in, I'm in charge, I make the decisions. That's my place, that's my role. And like you all are here just to participate in this dynamic.
It's wild to me in the example that you're sharing because and we're going to have a separate episode about like how do you handle when there's sort of like one or two folks that are really kind of bringing ego to the table and are really problematic and everybody else is like really there to collaborate. That's the next episode. So we'll
Right.
dive into it to a little bit more, much more, I should say, deeply then. But what's wild to me about the scenario that you're discussing is that, and what pisses me off actually, to think back to, was it the last episode or the episode before around gaslighting? I think it was 2 episodes ago.
Few episodes ago, yeah.
Where like there are some folks that come in and like try to use the Jedi mind trick of like, this is how it is, right? But they know damn well that what they're saying is garbage. And then there's other folks that like repeat narratives, but that's just what they've been told. And so there isn't the same kind of malintent. It doesn't mean harm isn't happening,
Right.
but like there's a different sort of intent behind what's going on, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so you would expect somebody in a higher level position who's like, I'm here to like rein it in. Essentially, that person was brought in to like look at the bottom line and cut costs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it's wild to me in cases like this where somebody comes in and does stuff that like totally violates procedural safeguards.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a gamble because their ego and their need to like improve their job performance, right? I was brought in to clean house and your kid is just like part of the wreckage and too bad, right? But what they're doing is not acceptable. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but like that's not how you IEP,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so then you're essentially forcing the family into a situation where they can try to navigate this sort of in-house,
Mm-hmm.
but you're potentially forcing them into a position where, I mean, and obviously this situation they had you, but you're putting families in a position where they're going to incur some kind of cost if they want to fight this, because they are going to have to either get an advocate to come in and call the garbage, or they're going to have to leap up and seek legal support. And that is that's unconscionable to me.
It goes against everything that you would think that you got into this to do. And that's and in fact it was even stated before it was stated. And that was the thing. And I want to be clear, mom and dad went off and cuss words were said, and understandably so.
Fair enough.
Um
I'm raising my glass to mom and
It
dad.
was even said before the decision, before she finally said it, because she was skating around it.
Sure, she
Like,
was.
and if you have your procedural safeguards, so you know if you disagree with the outcome, what you can do. And then the dad was like, "So what are you saying? Like, can you?" And then she's like, "Well, I'm saying," and I said, "No, he is explicitly asking you to state if you are saying you are going to pull the one-to-one." And she was like, "Yes." The one to one
And
is,
that's a team decision because how is that again?
yeah, no team decision at all.
Right. And I think that that's where, if we think about ego showing up and that ecosystem of the IEP team, you're right. That harm, that ego presence, especially when it's somebody with a title, right? Like a big title,
Mm-hmm.
it shuts the whole thing down. And then school, like the rest of the school team, right? The teachers and right, the related service providers that are really showing up for the learner are like secretly praying that like the family will, you know, use their procedural safeguard, right? Like that they'll exercise their
Absolutely,
right,
absolutely. Yeah, and
right?
that's and because throughout the IEP, I mean, the case manager and the gen ed teacher made it very well known, like all the things that um this person was doing. What we ultimately got it to, because I was there, was we did get it to where there would be a 1 to 3 parent in the room, at least, so that he doesn't go from to no pair, to no pair, 1 to 1 to
Right,
nothing. So we
right.
got it. So, and then and that was only because I was like, so you're telling me you're going to do X, Y, and Z, because I mean it was clearly predetermined.
Of course.
And so parents, are going to use the procedural safeguards. But it was just so blatant. And I think and mom and dad both acknowledged that they felt like his team that was on the ground, aside from this social worker, were trying. I mean, you read the IEP and it's clear that this one-to-one is
Right.
needed. They were asked to do this rating scale and they were supposed to give a number for what was clear. And so it was like, but this is clearly a decision that this individual had made. And I think another way, that I've seen ego, and I'm sure you've seen it show up at the IEP table, is when the, you know, the main person, as in the general educator, is ableist or
Never had
has
that happen.
such a need for
Sorry.
control that even when trying to strategize or asking questions, and I made a post about this the other day where I said, like you can't take someone asking questions. I can't remember my exact language, but you can't take someone asking questions as being defiant or defensive and get defensive, because autistics, that's what we do. And it wasn't until I was, obviously after my son was diagnosed and I was diagnosed, that I realized that's why my whole life I was asking so many questions, because I just want to know why. And I grew up very much the same. I grew up where like you don't question an adult, right? And so I get it, but I have seen where, I'm like, okay, can you tell me more about this? And it's immediate defense and it's immediate, I know what I'm doing, and I da 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 blah 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 blah. And when you do that, I'm like, you're not centering the learner. That's about you and your ego and your feeling that you're being attacked as a professional, which is completely human. But that is another way that can prevent progress from being made. And I've had to sometimes start out, and as I've grown in my advocacy work, I've adjusted my approach, and picked up honestly some social norms being autistic, um, and kind of started with, you know, I mean, it sounds like you're doing X, Y, and Z, but it doesn't seem to be working. Can you give me a little more detail? Because again, there's that, I'm doing all the things, I'm doing everything. And it's in a different way, because when we talk about the ego piece, we're talking about where they're literally will, no matter what way you ask that question, right? They still are very short. There's almost like there's nothing I can do here.
Mhm.
This learner just needs to change. And so whenever I see that dynamic, and that could be a body language, I had a general educator say one time she would not be answering any more questions and she was muting herself. I was like, and I just straight up said, with all her supervisors and everyone in the room, I said, okay, well, I thought this was supposed to be collaborative, but I guess, can anyone else answer the questions? But when you bring your ego, that's when you close off. That's when you get so defensive that you can't even see the questions being asked,
Right,
or
right,
hear, excuse me, the questions being asked.
right. And I feel like it puts families in a position,
Mhm.
again, kind of not kind of, an unfair position where having an advocate in the space is helpful, because you as the parent should not be expected to sort of massage the ego of folks in the room, right? You are already in a vulnerable position,
Mhm.
like coming in, and obviously some teams handle this really beautifully where they really do treat the family as an equal member, but that's
Right.
not necessarily the norm or how families feel. They feel like there's a disequilibrium of power, right? And so I find myself, when there's a situation that's tricky or there's like lots of moving parts and things aren't going well, that I have to sort of, I hate the word coddle, but like almost kind of anticipate and coddle that ego a little bit, or the
Mhm.
potential ego, before I start asking questions, right? So that it it cues to the adult that I'm not on the attack, right?
Right.
Like I almost feel like some of those trauma-informed strategies that, right, like the I wonder, I'm curious about, or that makes me think of, right? Like I find myself
Mhm.
using a lot of that kind of language and approach in an IEP meeting
With
instead of
adults.
just directly saying, like, seems like shit's going sideways. Like, how do we talk about it? Like, I feel like there's some of this work because I feel like one of the, as you were talking earlier, one of the sort of scripts I was hearing in my head that's like a cue to me that ego is starting to enter the space is I have been doing this for fill in the blank amount of years.
Uh, it's so exhausting because I don't give a shit. Um, and if you're not watching YouTube, you can't see, like, I just put my head back and sighed and just, um, no, because, and I think, and I have, and I will say, I have my own, just as a little side note for everyone listening, I have my own personal, like, trauma history with that one, in that I graduated high school when I was 17. I've graduated early from everything I've pretty much done in life. And so I was a lot of times the youngest one in the room. And so
Sure.
even though I had the educational backing and so does the professional backing, my age was what made people question whether or not I had the knowledge. And so it would be like this competition of a 20-year-old, or 23-year-old or 25-year-old against a 50-year-old. And my
Right.
parents always taught me and my sister, like, respect is respect. And so I was always like, I don't care. And then subsequently, when it came to my son, that was the special educator was like, I've done this for 13 years. I've never met a child like yours. He's oppositional defiant. So I have a lot of trauma when it comes to like that type of discussion. But I think you're absolutely correct. A lot of times that is used as I know what I'm talking about. And it always goes back to the statement, I will never forget that one of my first supervisors said, my first, I like to call it big kid, big girl, mental health jobs, was that the day you stop learning, you need to get out of the field.
Right. That's what I was thinking as you were talking, right? Like to me, when somebody says, I've been teaching for fill in the blank years, or I've been doing this for whatever years, the unspoken part of that is, I'm not here to learn. I
Mm-hmm.
am right, you are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't anything I haven't seen,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have time for this. Right? So it's both kind of gaslighting, but like the first domino is ego. Well, I don't know.
Absolutely.
There's so much going on. First domino could be
I
egoism.
mean,
But
it's
like it's
so
all
fair.
like wrapped up into this like shitty ball, right? Like, but there's like so much in those handful of words, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
and it's tricky. It's like I'm thinking of a different family where the classroom teacher, God bless, right? I'm trying really hard. Not working. But this teacher in particular, she's been teaching for 23 years. I know these things because she told me. She's announced it at many meetings. And her perspective on the learner is that they have a conduct disorder,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's
right?
it.
Right? That it's a quote unquote like bad kid,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that tracks.
right? It tracks. So we show up for the eligibility meeting. This was like a week or two ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never seen this. I don't know if you've ever seen this. This teacher had a prepared teacher input statement
Oh.
that was mostly all about her and not about the learner,
Okay.
right? Like she tried, there was lots of like sunshine and roses, and like she tried to paint this picture of like, I actually care about this kid, but the venom just kept showing up, and the venom was
As a
definitely
way
in
of
the
seeping through
scores.
the cracks.
It has a way of seeping through the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this really like I won't read my notes out loud of what I wrote, but I basically said she's full of shit and I don't trust her. Like those were the notes I took during the meeting. Like I've never had a teacher show up with a prepared statement of like, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that and da 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 da, and this kid is still a terror, right? Like, and like anyway, I don't want to get too in the weeds of this particular situation, but it was quite astounding um to see somebody sort of I think she knew there's a chasm between her and the parents. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think she came in defensive. I had a
Mm-hmm.
situation where a principal knew that there was a chasm between family and her and how she had treated their learner. And she showed up intermittently, like kept coming and going. She had principal things to do. Don't even. And she came back when we really needed to discuss the behavior plan and sort of the coordination between administration and staff of like what the plan allows for this young person
Mm-hmm.
because the administrator was coming in with their discipline, you can't do this, lots and lots and lots of restrictions. It was
Mm-hmm.
actually like completely out of compliance with the IEP and the behavior plan. And so it
Talk
was
to
like
more.
we need to sort of open up those lines of communication and see
Mm-hmm.
where we can better understand the needs and what that can look like so that we're working within like what you'll allow on campus, but also we're working within what this young person needs
Right.
support them and remove these barriers to access, right? And so the parents were trying like as gently as humanly possible to bring up that, right? And there had been some stuff like if it had been in this family, we would have had some serious issues. Like my husband would have lost his marbles, right? This dad was, I can't even. But as soon as the dad started talking, the principal threatened to leave and was like, if you think that you're going to turn this into attack the principal, you are sorely mistaken because I will leave here in a heartbeat. And like, I would start laughing. I
Because you
was
can
like,
go.
I don't think you'd be able to leave the room because your ego has gotten so big. I don't think you can get out the door. But it was just, and the family was like, that's not what we're trying to do. Right. Sometimes I just
Right.
feel like the ego shows up as defensiveness before we've even entered the space.
Oh, no, yeah, 100%. And I think, we've named a few, just, going over just a few of the things that we've named. We've named the subtlety of ego. So it's like you're not outwardly saying it, but your body language, the way in which the things you speak on in the meeting, the things you pay attention to, the lack of paying attention shows up as ego. We've talked about how you directly come in like, this is my role and this is what I'm going to do, already kind of setting up that power dynamic
Yeah.
of like, I'm the one who makes the decisions and you all are just here, which we know is not even legally, and we are not attorneys, how an IEP team works per IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which names parents and the learner as IEP team members. Um, we've talked about how that defensiveness can come from, the individual in the classroom. We've talked about how the ego can show up from outside of the school and impact those in the school, the staff themselves, because they have to be careful or watch or be mindful of what they're saying. And they feel like they're essentially going against a supervisor, which creates this, again, there's another power dynamic there that's there with that ego piece. But I think another thing that we're talking about is because, you brought up that punishment and discipline piece, is that I see ego show up at the IEP table in that way a lot, where you can have, and this is how they're essentially saying it, right? It's like you can have your little IEP all you want. You can have your little FBA, you can have your little BIP, but I ultimately make the decision.
Right.
And this is going to be their punishment because they are not above the code of conduct. They are not above the rules of other students. They are not this, not that, and it's first ableist. Second, it's a complete disregard for the learner, their plan, and the work that the staff is attempting to do.
Right.
And so once again, because I kind of just want to, we've talked a lot about ego entering the room, and it's kind of, I just know somebody that's hearing this that is a school staff member is going, like, oh my gosh, so we're just the worst, and I don't do that, and I don't do this, and hopefully, you've listened to our other episodes, you know that is not the approach you bring to it at all. But what I'm saying is that ego can harm the parent, always harms the learner, but can also harm the school staff. And so,
Right.
because of, again, that power dynamic it brings, it's disrupting your work. I don't know who needs to hear this, but I'm sorry, the learner that gets dysregulated, that's getting suspended all the time and pulled out of your class all the time, is still not learning to regulate in your classroom. So it's not helping you. So every time they show back up, it's causing you issues. But the other thing I also want to bring to the forefront, because we talk about everything here, is that, as advocates, and I'll speak for myself and let Lisa speak for herself, but I've had times where I have had to make sure the parent's ego didn't come in the room. And what I mean by that is, again, just like we say, like how the staff can be defensive, the parent can be defensive or feel like you have done all these things. And so now it's my rules. It's my, like, I'm not agreeing unless X, Y, and Z. And I've had to say, this is about the learner, because
Right.
ultimately what we're talking about here, when we talk about ego, I don't care if you're the special education director, the superintendent, the principal, the gen ed, special ed, related service provider, social worker, mental health professional. I don't care what your role is.
Right.
IEP meetings are for the learner. They're
That
about
is correct.
learner services, their support, removing barriers for them, creating specifically designed instruction, specialized academic instruction for them to access a setting not created for them. And in order to do that, you have to come in with the learner at the forefront and not what you want, not what you need. It's not about you.
Right. That part. No, it's so true. This isn't, well, we're not here to attack anybody,
Right.
but it really is about ego, period, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, understandably, when parents don't feel like they're being listened to,
Mm-hmm.
and or they feel like their learner is not being centered in the process. Like one way I think ego can show up at an IEP table is when like the parents have one conceptualization of their child and the team has a different conceptualization. And so both can get stuck in I'm right and you're wrong, and that
Mm-hmm.
can create a chasm that's difficult to overcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
I tend to think that there's probably some grain of truth in both,
Right.
but I do tend to lean towards, obviously nothing's binary, but do tend to lean towards parents have a better understanding, generally speaking, of who their child
Mm-hmm.
is. But we're not in the school setting, and we don't
Right.
necessarily know with 100% certainty what that looks like, right?
And I just want to side note in there, when you said that, what pops out for me is that, don't lose your train of thought. And when you say that, what pops out for me too is that if your ego's in the room, we won't know,
Right,
because
right.
you cannot tell us what's happening. You're more stuck on defending what you're doing.
Right, right. And I think that it gets into this like tricky dynamic
Mm-hmm.
where everybody's feeling like they need to defend themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we talked about this in the gaslighting episode as well, where sometimes it shows up as reassurance,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? I'm a professional. I've got this. Everything's fine. Just get your kid here. Right. And it's like, you're not hearing me that like everything is not right as rain. Like multiple
Right.
things can be true at the same time. But I think what you just said is so poignant is that if we get stuck that in being right,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we've lost the opportunity to be a learner, right? Like I was really frustrated about a situation in my personal life, and was bitching loudly at my husband about said situation that had nothing to do with him. It was something else. And he was like, Lisa, here's where you're stuck. And he's like, I'm going to speak in the binary and just Like, know
Right.
that this
Like,
isn't
don't attack
always like
me. I'm just
entirely
trying to
true. Like,
help.
he knows I can't stand that. So he's like trying to add this like caveat, right? God love him. And he's like, there's two kinds of people. I'm like, oh, tell me, what kinds of people are there? And he's like, there are people that have to be right, and there are people that have to be helping. He's like, that's not to say that the people who have to be right don't have situations where they really lean into being a helper. And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that people who are natural helpers don't have moments where they're like, I'm right, God damn it. Right? Like, he's like, the reason why there's such a chasm between you and this other person
Mm-hmm.
is that person operates from, I am right,
Mm-hmm.
and you operate from, how can I help?
Mm-hmm.
And when you are operating from, I am right, you are wrong, I know this, you don't, that is ego. And so
Mm-hmm.
it kind of doesn't matter what seat you are at the table. If that is the energy that's coming into the space, we've
Mm-hmm.
totally lost sight of the learner and their experience, right? Like, I don't care who thinks they're right at the table. If the learner is communicating something very different, y'all are wrong,
100%. 100%.
right?
I always speak about, like, particularly when it comes to my own kids, and my oldest has gotten really good at, we're able to talk through situations, and he's able to, express like what he was thinking and feeling. And I always share that with the IEP team. And I always tell them, when I share it, and Lisa sees a lot of the, the communication I'm going to send out, because I'm like, is this okay? Because sometimes I'm a little amped up too. Um, but I always say, this does not mean this is what happened. This does not
Right.
mean that, any XYZ was right or wrong, but this is his perception, and his perception matters. And I think if
Exactly.
we came to the IEP table more like that,
Right.
it would be different. And I often have found myself now saying that a lot in IEP meetings, starting off by saying, because a lot of times it'll be, because let's just be honest, I always say this, there's a variety of reasons advocates are brought in. Sometimes it's because the parents just like, look, this is all above me, I don't understand X, Y, and Z, like I need support there, or I need support with drafting things, or but a lot of times it's because I'm feeling unheard.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so they bring you in, and then I found myself saying many a times, I understand that this is your perception, but this is their perception. And what we need to try and figure out is, how do we move forward in a way that is beneficial for the learner? Notice how I didn't say that's beneficial for you as the staff or you as the parent. I said that's
Right.
beneficial for the learner.
Right.
Because again, there are times, and I'm guilty of it too as a parent of neurodivergent learners, where I've had to talk things through with Lisa or my husband, because I'm like, no, they gonna learn today. And it's like, and then it's like, but that's not the point. And I had a situation like that happen earlier in the year. And it was a thing where I fell back on, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna fall back, because it was becoming a, you're wrong and I'm right in what I'm saying can happen, and not about what would support my learner at this time. And I had to take a step back and go, my learner says that they're fine, this is fine, their behavior and responses, everything was in tune and in line with that. So I need to take a step back. And that's not easy to do, but it's something that I think, if you're going to do this from the standpoint of truly doing it for the learner, you have to take ego out of it. You
Yeah.
have to.
No, 100%. 100%. And as you were talking, I was thinking, those are such tricky dynamics when you, as the parent, and I'm sure this happens for teachers as well, right? Like, I'm thinking of a situation where I know the teacher felt they were right, not necessarily because of ego, but because they really truly thought that they were protecting the learner and they thought that the decisions that were being made and what the parent was asking for was centering the parent and not the learner because they just, right? But I think regardless of where you're sitting, but I'll ground it in the parent's experience on this one is when you see the harm happening, right? And so you know you're right. And so you are operating from this place of trying to center your learner's experience. And so you don't want to be tripping on your own ego. You really are trying to amplify your learner's
Right. You're like, no,
perspective.
this is harming my child, and I see this. Yeah, no.
Right. Like, but you're not being heard. The ego that's problematic in that room really are the folks that aren't listening. Right?
100%.
Like it really is there, it's tricky. And so it is in those situations, and I hate to keep saying it, but it is in those situations where it is really beneficial to have an additional person that can almost kind of help translate that and again, the words I don't love, like sort of coddle the ego or front load to say like, I had a situation, this was a couple of years ago, where it was both parents were teachers in the district. And one of the parents, their classroom was two doors down from the child's teacher, and there was a whole lot of mess going on.
Oh.
And the teacher of record sent an email like, I have never seen of I'm right, you're wrong, you question my practice one more time, I'm filing a complaint against you. Like literally, like what is that, 50 feet, if that, down the hallway, teacher neighbor, right? So I came into this situation at this sort of moment in time where temperatures were running really, really, really high. And this was a learner on a 504 because, of course, they hadn't yet been found eligible for an IEP. And so we are just burying head in sand and, really it was not a good situation. And the learner was in crisis, a high masking PDA, or so totally like mismatch and understanding of who this young person was. And so they brought me in, and I just remember they introduced me as a PDA expert, and I started laughing. I was like, I'm not an expert in anything other than maybe sarcasm and like bad jokes, but I was like, I'm a curious learner, right? So I tried to set the foundation of like, I'm not an expert. I was like, I appreciate, but I want to establish like that I'm not an expert. I'm just a really curious learner. And so, as we sort of lift up and as I share kind of what I think might be happening and ask questions, please know that I am coming from that place of curiosity. There are zero accusations being made. I'm not questioning anyone's practice. This is a tricky situation with a nuanced learner, and we're trying to ground this conversation in who they are and what they need in this space. And
Right.
so, and I named it. I was like, I know there's a dynamic that's happening between home and school that's problematic. And today's intent is not to further that chasm. Today is a day where we are here to get curious, right? Like there are times where you need that extra person to come in and say, and I will say, because I thought it was going to be an absolute like shitstorm. I got the teacher that wrote the email that was like, I'm gonna this, that, and the other to you to actually start asking questions and be curious. So it is possible to move the needle. But I think that's a
It
really
is.
huge ask of a parent if they're the parent in that kind of dynamic. And I think it's really hard to ask that of a teacher who feels like they're kind of being attacked and
Right.
they're trying the things to be able to say like, I have questions, but I'm not trying to like further this horrible dynamic, right? Like having somebody that can sort of help see the humanity around the room
Right.
and facilitate that is helpful. And I'm certainly like, I feel really shitty saying all of this because I don't want anyone to feel like I'm kind of gatekeeping this experience, right? Like, but I do feel like it's so tricky when ego shows up at the table to know like what to say, and it can show up in so many different forms
Again.
that like I'm so glad who's ever listening to this, right, is hearing some of these ways of like how could I practice that script and try it without having like Lisa or Destiny or somebody in their role like at the table, right? If that's not an
Right.
accessible thing for you, or like, right, that's one of the things that makes me feel good about this podcast is that I feel like we try to give some of these practical tips, but I
Yes.
want to acknowledge like your own nervous system when you're entering a IEP meeting where there's some
Mhm.
tension and friction, and then ego is there because there are times like another situation I'm thinking of is I had a family where we were questioning eligibility category.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we front loaded team with, hey, thanks for doing these evaluations. We really appreciated, having the opportunity to review, have some questions, and then
Right.
like culled through their data to say, we think you actually captured quite a bit of nuance, but we kind of don't understand why you landed where you landed. And there's
Right.
pieces that feel like are missing, and we want to have this conversation, right?
Right.
So we show up and everybody's on their best behavior. But the psychologist who had done the
Mhm.
assessment, who really had like, I think, swung and missed in terms of
Mhm.
like their conclusions and recommendations, um, went through their findings.
Mhm.
And they were very skilled at the gaslighting and the ego because it was said in like very, I don't even want to say neutral sort of tone of voice, like very warm. And when you filled out the questionnaire, we called this data, and this is what we noticed in the pattern of your responses, and right. And I just remember sitting and listening and thinking, if I was the parent and this was coming back at me, I would literally have no idea what to say. Because
Mhm.
basically, what she was saying is, I did my job, I am right, and you are wrong. And so I just know that if it had been me sitting as the parent, I would have been like, well, fuck, okay. Right? Thankfully, I wasn't the parent and that wasn't my response.
Right.
And
And
we'll
we're
find
gonna do
out.
a whole episode. We're gonna do a whole episode because I am a mental health professional. We're gonna do a whole episode about mental health in the school setting and supports and all that. Cause I got a lot. I got a lot to
Oh,
put
so
out
good.
there.
So, so, so good. Yeah. We're going to find out next week if that pendulum swung or
Mm.
if the less nice version of me has to show up. We're going to find out. It'll be very interesting. But stick a pin in that. But it's just, I want to acknowledge that I understand that there's privilege in having an additional person come with you, and that
Absolutely.
some of these situations are really tricky to navigate without that additional support. It's not that it can't be done, but it's
Right.
like, how are you caretaking? And I love the idea of doing an episode on mental health because
Mhm.
how are parents who can't access this additional support taking care of their own nervous system needs
Mhm.
in a situation that is like feels really unnatural and uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think this is a good stop point for this because we are going to subsequently, right after this, we're recording an episode about, really getting into some practical ways to address some of the things that we've seen at the table. And this was the point of this episode was to just, really dig into the ways in which ego can present. And like we always say with every episode, right? It's for everyone that sits on an IEP team. And as I always say, an IEP team is a school team and the home team. And that's what makes the IEP team. And so it's important to look at who you're centering when you step into the IEP meeting. And if it's not the learner, then it is your ego. And that's just that. That is how simple it is. And so hopefully, you heard the ways in which we said, like, it can be addressed openly, outwardly stated, and like, this is my role, and kind of showing, that power dynamic. It can be in the way that you present at the meeting, lack of interest, doing multiple things, nonverbals, your body language. the way in which you chime in, the way in which you respond, the way in which you come into the situation and kind of, plant your flag of like, I know what I'm saying and this is who I am and this is where I stand and I'm unwilling to learn. And even like, and that was such a great example that Lisa gave, because we see that as advocates, we see that often, we've experienced that as parents. And again, it's saying one thing, but there's layers and there's pieces underneath it that if you don't know that that's ego. And so, hopefully you listen to this and you might listen to this and go, yeah, I know exactly someone like that on my team right now. You might be listening to that and be like, oh crap, I've been that person. But hopefully it's a learning experience. And again, you remember to center the learner. And then join us on our next episode where we get more into the weeds of when you feel like you're battling against one or two IEP team members and what are some ways that you can handle that.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
Thank you again for joining us here in the Affirming Village. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff and Lisa Baskin-Wright, and we hope today's conversation leaves you feeling seen, supported, and better equipped to advocate for yourself or your learner. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone else in the village. Until next time, keep advocating, keep affirming, and keep building the village we all deserve.